Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to another story. Today, I have something that I think is going to stay with you for a long time. This story comes from a woman named Patricia, and when I first read what happened to her, I had to sit down and process it. It's one of those stories that makes you question everything about family, loyalty, and what people are really capable of when money gets involved. So grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let's get into this one together. My name is Patricia. I'm 63 years old, and 2 years ago, my own son changed the locks on the house I built with my bare hands and told me I was no longer welcome there. I want you to really understand what that means. I'm not talking about some house I bought with a mortgage. I'm talking about a house that I watched go up brick by brick. A house where I mixed cement until my arms felt like they would fall off. A house where I painted every single wall myself because I couldn't afford to hire painters. That house. My house. And my son looked me dead in the eyes and told me to leave. But here's what he didn't know. Here's what nobody knew. I had been holding on to a secret for 37 years, a secret that I buried so deep, I almost forgot about it myself. And when we ended up in that courtroom, when my son stood there with his expensive lawyer thinking he had already won, I pulled out that secret like a weapon. The look on his face when the judge read those documents out loud is something I will never forget for as long as I live. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how we got here, because this story didn't start 2 years ago. This story started decades ago, when I was just a young woman trying to survive in a world that didn't seem to want me to succeed. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. My parents were good people, but we had nothing, and I mean nothing. There were nights when dinner was just bread and water, because that's all we could afford. My father worked at a factory that made car parts, and my mother cleaned houses for rich families on the other side of town. Between the two of them, they barely made enough to keep the lights on. I was the youngest of 4 kids, 3 older brothers, and then me. In a house like that, you learn pretty quickly that resources are limited. You learn that if you want something, you better figure out how to get it yourself, because nobody's going to hand it to you. School was hard for me. Not because I wasn't smart, but because I couldn't focus when my stomach was growling. I couldn't concentrate on math problems when I was worried about whether we would have heat that winter. But I pushed through. I graduated high school by some miracle, and I immediately started working. I took any job I could find. I cleaned offices at night. I worked at a grocery store during the day. I did laundry for an elderly woman down the street who couldn't do it herself anymore. Every single dollar I made, I saved. I lived on almost nothing so that I could build something for myself one day. When I was 22, I met a man named Robert. He was charming in that way that some men are when they want something from you. He had this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was special. He told me all the things I had been desperate to hear my whole life. We got married 6 months after we met. Looking back, I know that was too fast. I know I should have taken more time to really understand who he was. But when you grow up the way I did, when you spend your whole childhood feeling invisible and unimportant, someone paying that much attention to you feels like oxygen. You don't question it. You just breathe it in. 3 months after we got married, I found out I was pregnant, and for a moment, just a brief moment, I thought maybe everything was going to be okay. Maybe this was the beginning of the family I had always dreamed about. Maybe Robert and I would build something beautiful together. that moment didn't last long. Robert started changing almost as soon as he found out about the baby. He became distant. He started coming home late. He started picking fights about small things that didn't matter. I would ask him what was wrong, and he would just shrug and walk away. I would try to talk to him about the baby, about our future, and he would look at me like I was speaking a foreign language. When I was 7 months pregnant, Robert left. He didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face. I came home from work one day, and his clothes were gone. His toothbrush was gone. The watch his father gave him that he kept on the nightstand was gone. Everything that belonged to him had just vanished. And on the kitchen table was a note. 4 sentences. After everything we had been through together, after everything I had sacrificed for him, he left me with 4 sentences. The note said, "I'm not ready for this. I'm not the man you need me to be. Don't try to find me, I'm sorry." That was it. That was all I got. No explanation, no forwarding address, no phone number where I could reach him. Just those 4 sentences and an empty apartment. I cried for 3 days straight. I barely ate. I barely slept. I just lay in bed and wondered what I had done wrong. Was I not pretty enough? Was I not kind enough? Was there something fundamentally broken inside me that made people want to leave? But on the 4th day, something shifted. I woke up and I felt this baby moving inside me, this little life that had no idea what was happening in the outside world. And I realized that I couldn't fall apart. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. There was someone depending on me now. Someone who needed me to be strong even when I felt completely shattered. So I got up. I washed my face. I made myself something to eat. And I started planning. I moved back in with my parents. Temporarily, because I couldn't afford the apartment by myself. It was humiliating to be 23 years old and pregnant and moving back into the room I had as a child. But pride doesn't pay the bills, and I needed to save every penny I could for when the baby came. 2 months later, my son was born. I named him Derek. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. 7 pounds, 8 ounces, a full head of dark hair. And when he opened his eyes and looked at me for the first time, I made him a promise. I promised him that I would give him everything I never had. I promised him that he would never go to bed hungry. I promised him that he would always have a roof over his head. I promised him that I would work myself to the bone if that's what it took to give him a good life. And that's exactly what I did. For the next 15 years, I worked harder than I ever thought possible. I took every extra shift I could get. I learned new skills so I could get better jobs. I went to night school to get my real estate license while Derek was sleeping. I sacrificed everything for that boy. There were years when I didn't buy myself a single new piece of clothing. Years when I wore the same worn-out shoes until they literally had holes in the bottom. But Derek always had new clothes for school. Derek always had everything he needed. When Derek was 8, I finally saved enough money to buy a piece of land. It wasn't much, just a small plot on the outskirts of town that nobody else wanted. But it was mine. I paid for it in cash because I didn't trust banks, and I didn't want anyone to be able to take it away from me. I spent the next 2 years building a house on that land. I hired a contractor for the foundation because I didn't know how to do that myself, but everything else I did on my own, or with help from my brothers. I learned how to frame walls by watching videos at the library. I learned how to install plumbing by reading books. I learned how to wire electricity by asking questions at the hardware store. Every weekend, every holiday, every spare moment I had went into that house. Derek would play in the yard while I hammered nails and measured boards. He thought it was an adventure. He didn't understand that his mother was building him a future, one piece of lumber at a time. When Derek was 10, we finally moved in. The house wasn't fancy. It was small, just 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The floors were basic laminate that I installed myself. The kitchen had the cheapest cabinets I could find, but it was ours. Nobody could ever take it away from us. I still remember the first night we spent in that house. Derek ran from room to room, touching everything, looking out every window. He asked me if this was really our home, if we really didn't have to move again. And when I told him yes, this was ours forever, he hugged me so tight, I thought he might never let go. That little boy, that sweet little boy who hugged me like I was his whole world. That's the same person who would one day change the locks and tell me to get off his property, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the years in between, the years when everything seemed fine, the years when I thought I had done everything right. Derek was a good kid growing up. At least, I thought he was. He got decent grades in school. He played basketball in middle school and was pretty good at it. He had friends who would come over to the house and play video games on the weekends. Normal kid stuff. When he was 15, he started asking about his father. This was a conversation I had been dreading for years. I had told him the basic facts when he was young, that his father's name was Robert, that Robert left before Derek was born, that I didn't know where Robert was now. But as Derek got older, he wanted more details. He wanted to understand why his father had abandoned him. I tried to be honest, without being too harsh. I told Derek that his father wasn't ready to be a parent. I told him that some people aren't capable of giving love the way they should. I told him that Robert leaving had nothing to do with Derek himself, that Derek was perfect and wonderful, and the problem was entirely with Robert. But Derek was angry. You could see it building in him over the years, this rage that had no outlet. He started acting out in small ways, talking back to teachers, getting into arguments with other kids, staying out past curfew and lying about where he had been. I tried to be patient with him. I understood where his anger was coming from. I had felt that same anger when Robert left me. But patience only goes so far when you're watching your child head down a dangerous path. High school was rough. Derek barely graduated. He had the intelligence to do well. I knew that, but he just didn't seem to care. He was more interested in hanging out with friends who didn't seem to have any direction in life. They would sit around smoking cigarettes and complaining about how unfair everything was, instead of actually doing something to improve their situations. After high school, Derek got a job at an auto repair shop. It was honest work, and I was proud of him for getting a job at all. But he didn't stick with it. He quit after 6 months because he said his boss was too demanding. Then he got another job at a warehouse. Quit that after 4 months because the hours were too early. Then another job at a restaurant. Quit that after 3 months because he didn't like one of his coworkers. This pattern continued for years. Derek would get a job, complain about it constantly, and then quit before he had really given it a fair chance. And every time he quit, he would move back into my house, eat my food, and live off my generosity until he found the next job. I let him do this because he was my son, because I loved him, because I kept hoping that eventually he would grow up and figure things out. When Derek was 25, he met a woman named Christine. She was pretty in a flashy kind of way, with lots of makeup and expensive-looking clothes. She worked as a receptionist at a dentist's office, and she seemed to have ambitions. At first, I was happy for Derek. I thought maybe having a partner would motivate him to be more responsible. I was wrong. Christine was the kind of person who always wanted more. More money, more things, more status. Nothing was ever good enough for her. And instead of pushing Derek to work harder and earn more, she just pushed him to expect more from me. They got married when Derek was 27. It was a small ceremony at the courthouse because they couldn't afford anything bigger. I paid for everything anyway, the rings, the clothes, the dinner afterwards. I was just happy that my son was building a life. 6 months after they got married, Christine got pregnant. And just like when I found out I was pregnant with Derek all those years ago, I thought maybe this would change things. Maybe having a child would finally push Derek to grow up and take responsibility. Their daughter was born the following spring. They named her Madison. She was adorable, with Derek's dark hair and Christine's green eyes. When I held her for the first time, I felt all those same emotions I had felt when I first held Derek. That overwhelming love, that fierce protectiveness, that desire to give her everything. But things started going downhill almost immediately after Madison was born. Derek and Christine were terrible with money. They spent everything they had on things they didn't need. A brand new television when the old one worked fine. Expensive strollers and baby gear that Madison would outgrow in months. Dinners at restaurants instead of cooking at home. New phones every time a new model came out. They maxed out credit cards. They fell behind on their rent. And every single time they got into financial trouble, they came to me for help. I helped them. Every time, I dipped into my savings to pay their bills. I bought groceries when they couldn't afford food. I paid for Madison's daycare when they needed to work. I did everything a grandmother and mother should do because I love them. But here's the thing about helping people who don't help themselves. It never ends. The more you give, the more they expect. And eventually, they stop seeing it as help. They start seeing it as something they're entitled to. When Madison was 3 years old, Derek and Christine's landlord evicted them. They hadn't paid rent in 4 months. 4 months, and they hadn't even told me they were behind. I found out when Derek called me crying, saying they had nowhere to go. So I did what any mother would do. I let them move into my house. That was the biggest mistake of my life. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. They were supposed to stay for a few months, save up some money, and get their own place again. But months turned into a year, then 2 years, then 5 years. And somewhere along the way, Derek and Christine stopped acting like guests in my home and started acting like it belonged to them. They rearranged furniture without asking me. They repainted Madison's room without asking me. They invited friends over at all hours without considering that I might need to sleep. They used my kitchen like it was theirs, my bathroom like it was theirs, my living room like it was theirs. And the more comfortable they got, the less respect they showed me. Christine started making comments about how the house was outdated, how the kitchen needed to be renovated, how the bathroom needed new fixtures. She would say these things right to my face, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out the flaws in the home I had built with my own hands. Derek started getting short with me. He would snap at me over small things. If I asked him to help with yard work, he would roll his eyes like I was asking him for some huge favor. If I made dinner and it wasn't something he wanted, he would complain instead of being grateful that someone had cooked for him at all. And through all of this, I still paid for everything. The mortgage was in my name. The utilities were in my name. The property taxes were in my name. They didn't contribute a single dollar to the household expenses. Not $1 in 5 years. I tried to talk to Derek about it multiple times. I would sit him down and explain that I was getting older, that my savings were running out, that I needed them to start contributing something, and every time, he would promise to do better. He would say he understood. He would tell me he loved me, and that he would take care of me the way I had taken care of him, but nothing ever changed. And then, the week after my 61st birthday, everything fell apart. It started with a conversation about the house. Christine had been looking at real estate listings online, and she found a house across town that she loved. It was bigger, newer, and in a better neighborhood. She was going on and on about how perfect it would be for their family, how Madison could have a bigger room, how they could finally have some privacy. I listened to her talk, and I didn't really think much of it. They couldn't afford the apartment they had lost. How were they going to afford a house? But then Derek said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "We've been thinking, Mom. This house is too much for you to maintain on your own. You're getting older, and the upkeep is going to be harder and harder. We think the best thing would be for you to sign the house over to us. That way, you don't have to worry about it anymore, and you could stay in the back bedroom for as long as you want. It would still be your home. It would just be in our names." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My son was asking me to give him my house, the house I built, the house I paid for, the house that represented every sacrifice I had ever made. He was asking me to just hand it over to him like it was nothing, and the way he said it, like he was doing me a favor, like he was being generous by offering to let me stay in the back bedroom of my own home. I told him no. I said it clearly and firmly. No, I would not be signing over my house. No, I would not be giving away everything I had worked for. This was my home, and it would stay in my name until the day I died. Derek got angry. He said I was being selfish. He said I was putting my own pride ahead of what was best for the family. He said I didn't trust him. He said all sorts of things that cut me deeply because they came from my own son. Christine joined in. She said they had sacrificed so much to take care of me. She said they could have been living in their own place this whole time, but they stayed to make sure I wasn't alone. She actually said that, like they had been doing me some big favor by living rent-free in my house for 5 years. The argument lasted hours. By the end of it, we were all screaming at each other. Madison was crying in her room, and nothing had been resolved. For the next few weeks, there was tension in the house that you could feel the moment you walked through the door. Derek and Christine barely spoke to me. When they did speak, it was short and cold. They started having whispered conversations that would stop the moment I entered the room. I should have seen what was coming. I should have known that they were planning something. But I was too trusting. I was too naive. I still believed that my son loved me, that he would never truly hurt me. One afternoon, I came home from running errands and found all my things sitting on the front lawn. My clothes, my personal items, my photo albums, everything that belonged to me was just piled up on the grass, like garbage. I tried to open the front door, but my key didn't work. They had changed the locks. Derek came to the window and told me that I needed to leave. He said this was his house now, and I wasn't welcome anymore. He said if I didn't leave, he would call the police and have me removed for trespassing. Trespassing. In my own home. The home I built with my own 2 hands. I stood there on that lawn, surrounded by my belongings, and I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, although that was broken too. Something deeper, my faith in the world, my belief that if you do everything right, if you sacrifice everything for your children, they will take care of you in return. I was 61 years old, and I was homeless. That's when I decided to fight back. Let me pause here and tell you what I did next. But first, let me ask you this. What would you do if your own child did this to you? What would you do if everything you had ever worked for was stolen by the person you had given everything to? I didn't know what to do either. Not at first. But I figured it out. And what I found changed everything. That night, I stayed with my older brother, Martin. He lived about 30 minutes away in a small apartment that barely had room for him, let alone a guest. But he didn't hesitate for a second when I called him crying. He just said, "Come over. We'll figure this out." Martin had never liked Derek much. He always thought Derek was spoiled, that I had given him too much and expected too little in return. Martin was the kind of person who believed you had to earn everything you got in life, and he never saw Derek earning anything. "I tried to tell you," Martin said as he handed me a cup of tea. "That boy was always taking advantage of you, and that wife of his made it 10 times worse." I couldn't argue with him. Everything he said was true. But knowing I had been warned didn't make the pain any less. If anything, it made it worse. I had seen the signs and ignored them. I had chosen to believe the best about my son, even when all the evidence pointed to the opposite. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. Her name was Sandra Mitchell. She was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses that she kept pushing up on her nose. Her office was small and cluttered with files, but there was something reassuring about her. She looked like someone who had seen everything and wasn't going to be shocked by my story. I told her everything, from the beginning, from Robert leaving me pregnant, to building the house, to letting Derek move in, to finding my belongings on the lawn. I talked for over an hour, and she just listened, taking notes occasionally, but mostly just letting me get it all out. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with this expression that I couldn't quite read. "Your son has no legal claim to that house," she said. "The deed is in your name. You paid for the land. You paid for the construction. You have all the receipts and documentation. He can change the locks all he wants, but that doesn't make it his property." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time since finding my things on the lawn, I felt like maybe this wasn't hopeless. "But here's the thing," Sandra continued. "Getting you back into that house is going to take time. We'll need to go to court. We'll need to file papers. And depending on how your son responds, this could get messy. Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared?" I didn't know. I had never been in a courtroom in my life. I had never sued anyone. I had never been involved in any kind of legal dispute. The idea of going to court against my own son felt surreal, like something that happened to other people on television shows. But what choice did I have? Let him keep my house? Let him get away with what he had done? Spend my remaining years living in someone else's spare bedroom because my own son had stolen everything from me? No, that wasn't an option. "Do whatever you need to do," I told Sandra. "I want my house back." She nodded, and I could see something that looked almost like respect in her eyes. Good, because I have a feeling this isn't going to be easy. She was right. It wasn't easy. Nothing about the next 18 months was easy. The first thing Sandra did was send a formal letter to Derek. It was a cease and desist letter that basically told him he was illegally occupying my property, and he needed to let me back in immediately or face legal consequences. I wish I could tell you that the letter worked. I wish I could tell you that Derek read those words from a lawyer and realized he had made a terrible mistake. I wish, I could tell you that he called me the next day, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. But that's not what happened. What happened was Derek got his own lawyer, a guy named Victor Brennan, who worked out of a fancy office downtown. I don't know how Derek afforded him, because Victor Brennan was not cheap. Later I found out that Christine's parents had given the money for the legal fees. Her parents had never liked me. They thought I was beneath them because I didn't come from money. They were more than happy to fund a legal battle against me. Victor Brennan sent back a response letter that made my stomach turn. In that letter, he claimed that Derek had been the primary caretaker of the property for years. He claimed that Derek had made substantial improvements to the home that increased its value. He claimed that there was an implied agreement between Derek and me that the house would eventually become his. And most painfully, he claimed that I had verbally promised to sign the house over to Derek multiple times. All of it was lies. Every single word. Yes, Derek had lived in the house for 5 years, but he hadn't taken care of anything. I was still the one paying the mortgage. I was still the one paying for repairs when things broke. I was still the one mowing the lawn and cleaning the gutters and doing all the maintenance work that keeps a house standing. The so-called improvements Derek made were a joke. He painted one room in 5 years. And he didn't even do a good job. There were drips on the trim and brush marks on the walls. That was his big contribution. And the verbal promise? That never happened. I never once told Derek I would give him my house. I had hoped that someday, after I was gone, he would inherit it. That was always my plan. But giving it to him while I was still alive? Never. I never said that. I never even implied it. But here's the thing about legal battles. The truth doesn't always matter as much as you think it should. What matters is what you can prove. What matters is what evidence you have. What matters is whose story sounds more believable to a judge. Sandra warned me that this was going to be a fight. She said Derek's lawyer was good at what he did, which was twisting the truth until it looked like something else entirely. She said we needed to gather every piece of evidence we could find, every receipt, every document, every record of payment, every photograph, anything that proved I was the true owner of that house and Derek was nothing more than a freeloader who had worn out his welcome. So that's what I did. I spent weeks gathering evidence. I went to the county records office and got copies of the original land purchase documents. My name was on them. Only my name. I went to the bank and got records of every mortgage payment I had ever made. 23 years of payments. Every single one made by me. I went through old boxes at Martin's apartment looking for receipts from when I built the house. I found receipts for lumber, for nails, for paint, for plumbing supplies, for electrical wiring. Hundreds of receipts, all with my name on them. I found photographs from when the house was being built. Pictures of me on the construction site, covered in sawdust and sweat. Pictures of the frame going up. Pictures of the roof being installed. Pictures that documented every step of the process. I found my old journals from that time, where I had written about the progress of the construction. I had detailed notes about what I did each day, how much things cost, what problems I encountered. It was all there in my own handwriting. The more evidence I gathered, the more confident I became. There was no way Derek could win this. The facts were on my side. The truth was on my side. He was trying to steal something that was mine, and I had mountains of proof that it belonged to me. But Sandra reminded me that Derek wasn't trying to win on facts. He was trying to muddy the waters. He was trying to make the situation seem more complicated than it was. He was hoping that a judge would look at all the conflicting claims and decide to split the difference somehow. That couldn't happen. I refused to let that happen. And the court date was set for 7 months after I first met with Sandra. 7 months of preparing, of gathering evidence, of practicing my testimony, of trying not to fall apart from the stress of it all. During those 7 months, I had no contact with Derek. Not a single phone call, not a single text message, not a single conversation. He was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating in my kitchen, and I couldn't even talk to him. I did see Madison a few times. Christine's mother would occasionally bring her to the park, and I would go there just to catch a glimpse of my granddaughter. I never approached them. I was afraid of what Christine's mother might say or do. But I would sit on a bench on the other side of the park and watch Madison play on the swings, and my heart would ache so badly I thought it might stop beating. She was 7 years old now. She probably didn't understand what was happening. She probably just knew that Grandma wasn't around anymore. Did she miss me? Did she ask about me? Did Derek and Christine tell her anything? Or did they just pretend I had never existed? Those were the hardest moments. Harder than losing my house. Harder than being betrayed by my son. Watching my granddaughter from a distance, unable to hold her or talk to her or tell her that I loved her. That pain was something I wouldn't wish on anyone. As the court date approached, Sandra sat me down for a serious conversation. "Patricia," she said, "I need to ask you something important. Is there anything about this situation that you haven't told me? Anything at all that might come up in court that could hurt our case?" I thought about it for a long moment. I had told her everything about Derek, about Christine, about the house, about the years of living together. But there was one thing I hadn't mentioned, one thing I had buried so deep that I had almost convinced myself it never happened. "There's something," I said slowly, "something from a long time ago. Something Derek doesn't know about." Sandra leaned forward. "Tell me." So I told her. I told her the secret I had been carrying for 37 years. The secret that I thought I would take to my grave. Let me tell you what that secret was. Remember how I told you that Derek's father, Robert, left when I was 7 months pregnant? Remember how I said he just disappeared one day with nothing but a 4-sentence note? That was true, but it wasn't the whole story. Robert came back. It was 6 months after Derek was born. I was living with my parents, exhausted from taking care of a newborn while also working multiple jobs. Derek had colic, and he cried constantly, and there were nights when I didn't sleep at all. I was running on fumes, barely holding myself together. One evening, there was a knock on my parents' door. My mother answered it, and I heard her gasp. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost a year. Robert's voice. He was standing on the porch, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He had lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were red like he had been crying. And he was holding flowers, cheap grocery store flowers that were already starting to wilt. "I made a mistake," he said when he saw me. "I made a terrible mistake. Please, Patricia, I want to come back. I want to be a father to our son. I want to be your husband again. Please give me another chance." Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. Part of me wanted to scream at him for abandoning me when I needed him most. Part of me wanted to hurt him the way he had hurt me. But there was another part of me, a small and tired and desperate part, that wanted to say yes, that wanted to have help with Derek, that wanted to not be alone anymore, that wanted someone else to share the burden with. So I let him inside. I let him hold Derek for the first time. I let him talk, let him explain where he had been and why he had left. He said he had panicked. He said the thought of being a father had terrified him so much that he couldn't breathe. He said he had spent the past year drifting from place to place, working odd jobs, trying to figure out who he was and what he wanted. And what he wanted, he said, was us. Me and Derek, his family. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something felt off. There was something about the way he looked at me, the way he asked questions, that made me uneasy. It wasn't until later that night, when he thought I wasn't listening, that I understood why. He was on the phone with someone. I don't know who. But I heard him say, "Yeah, her grandmother left her some money. I don't know how much, but it's something. And she's talking about buying land, building a house. If I play this right, I could get access to all of it." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He wasn't here because he loved me. He wasn't here because he wanted to be a father. He was here because he had heard about my small inheritance, and he wanted to get his hands on it. I didn't confront him that night. I was too shocked, too hurt, too disgusted to even look at him. Instead, I lay awake all night, Derek sleeping peacefully beside me, and I made a plan. The next morning, I told Robert that I would consider taking him back, but I said I needed time. I said I needed him to prove he was serious about being a husband and father. I said there were things we needed to sort out legally before I could trust him again. He agreed to everything. He was so eager, so confident that he had fooled me, that he didn't even question it. I took him to see a lawyer. Not Sandra. This was decades before I met her. This was an older man named Henry Patterson, who had an office above the hardware store downtown. I told Robert we were going to sort out custody and parental rights, just to make everything official and legal. Robert didn't even read the documents before he signed them. He just asked where to put his signature and scribbled his name on every line I pointed to. What he actually signed was this. First, he signed a document acknowledging that he had abandoned me and Derek. He stated in writing that he had left voluntarily and had made no attempt to provide support or contact for the first 6 months of Derek's life. Second, he signed a document terminating his parental rights. He gave up any legal claim to Derek. He gave up any right to custody, visitation, or decision-making about Derek's upbringing. Third, and this was the most important one, he signed a document stating that he waived any claim to any property I currently owned or would own in the future. He acknowledged that any property in my name was mine alone, and that neither he nor any descendants of our union would have automatic rights to that property. That third document was unusual. Henry Patterson had raised his eyebrows when I asked him to draft it. He said he had never seen anyone ask for something like that before. But I explained my situation, and I explained what I had overheard Robert say on the phone, and Henry understood. "You're protecting yourself," he said. "Smart woman." Robert signed all 3 documents without reading a single word. He was so focused on the end goal, on getting access to my money, that he never bothered to understand what he was giving away. After he signed, I walked him to the door and told him to leave. I told him I knew why he was really there. I told him I had heard his phone conversation, and I told him that if he ever came near me or my son again, I would make sure everyone knew what kind of man he was. He tried to argue. He tried to backtrack. He tried to claim that I had misunderstood what he said, but I wasn't listening anymore. I closed the door in his face, and I never saw him again. I kept those documents in a safety deposit box at the bank. For 37 years, they sat there, untouched. I never told Derek about any of it. I never told him his father had come back. I never told him about the documents Robert had signed. Why didn't I tell him? Because I didn't want Derek to know that his father had come back only to try to steal from us. I thought it would hurt him too much. I thought it was better for him to believe that Robert simply left and never looked back, rather than knowing that Robert had returned and I had sent him away. Maybe that was the wrong decision. Maybe I should have been honest with Derek from the beginning. Maybe if he had known the truth about his father, he would have turned out differently. But I can't change the past. I can only deal with the present. And in the present, those documents changed everything. When I told Sandra about the documents, about what Robert had signed all those years ago, her eyes went wide. "You've had these the whole time?" she asked. "In a safety deposit box," I said. "I never thought I would need them." "Patricia," Sandra said, leaning forward with an intensity I hadn't seen from her before. "Those documents don't just prove that Robert gave up his parental rights. That third document, the one about property, that's extraordinary. It establishes, in writing, that no descendant of your marriage has automatic claim to your property. Derek can claim all he wants that you promised him the house, but this document proves that there was never any legal expectation of inheritance." "Will it hold up in court?" I asked. "It was properly witnessed and notarized," Sandra said. "It was drafted by a licensed attorney, and Robert signed it voluntarily. Yes, Patricia. This will hold up in court. This changes everything." For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. The court date arrived on a Tuesday in March. I remember the weather was cold and gray, the kind of day that felt heavy even before anything happened. Martin drove me to the courthouse because I didn't trust myself to drive. My hands were shaking too badly. I had worn my nicest dress, a dark blue one that I had bought specifically for this occasion. I wanted to look respectable. I wanted the judge to see me as a dignified older woman who had been wronged, not as some hysterical mother causing problems. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had seen courtrooms on television and movies, but those were always grand and imposing. This one was just a normal-sized room with fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable wooden benches. Derek was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a table on the other side of the room, with his lawyer, Victor Brennan. Christine was sitting in the gallery behind him, wearing a smug expression that made me want to scream. Derek didn't look at me. Not once. He kept his eyes fixed forward, like I didn't exist. Like I wasn't the woman who had given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him. I was just an obstacle now. Something standing between him and what he wanted. The judge came in, and everyone rose. Her name was Judge Karen Whitfield. She was a small woman with silver hair and glasses, probably close to my age. She had a no-nonsense expression that made me both nervous and hopeful. This was a woman who didn't seem like she would tolerate games. Victor Brennan presented his case first. He painted this picture of Derek as a devoted son who had given up his independence to care for his aging mother. He talked about the improvements Derek had supposedly made to the house. He talked about the implied promise that the house would be Derek's one day. He talked about how cruel and unreasonable I was being by trying to evict my own son from his home. It was all lies, but I had to admit he was good at telling them. His voice was smooth and confident, and he made eye contact with the judge like he was just having a friendly conversation with her. I could see how someone might believe him if they didn't know the truth. Then it was Sandra's turn. She started by presenting the basic facts. The land was purchased by me. The house was built by me. Every mortgage payment was made by me. Every receipt, every document, every piece of evidence showed that this was my property and mine alone. She called me to the stand, and I testified about everything. About building the house, about letting Derek and Christine move in as a temporary measure, about their refusal to contribute anything to the household expenses, about the day I came home to find my belongings on the lawn. Victor Brennan cross-examined me. He tried to make me look like a forgetful old woman. He tried to suggest that I had indeed promised Derek the house and simply couldn't remember. He tried to imply that I was exaggerating how little Derek had contributed to the household. But I held firm. I answered every question calmly and clearly. I didn't let him rattle me. I had spent too many years surviving too many difficult situations to let some smooth-talking lawyer break me now. Then came Derek's turn to testify. Watching my son take the stand was one of the hardest things I have ever experienced. This was the baby I had held in my arms, the little boy who used to run from room to room in the house I built for him, the teenager I had stayed up late waiting for, worrying about. Now he was sitting there, telling lies about me under oath, trying to steal everything I had worked for. He told the court that I had promised him the house many times. He said I had told him it was just too much work for me, and I wanted him to have it. He said I had agreed to put his name on the deed and only changed my mind at the last minute because we had a minor disagreement. A minor disagreement. That's what he called it. Like throwing my belongings on the lawn and changing the locks was just a small misunderstanding between family members. Victor Brennan asked Derek about his relationship with me. Derek talked about what a wonderful son he had been, how he had always taken care of me, how he had sacrificed so much to make sure I wasn't alone. It was disgusting to listen to. Every word out of his mouth was a distortion of reality. Then Sandra got to cross-examine him. She started with simple questions. She asked Derek how much he paid in rent while living in my house. He admitted he paid nothing. She asked how much he contributed to utilities, to property taxes, to the mortgage. He admitted he contributed nothing to any of those things. She asked about the improvements he claimed to have made. Derek talked about painting Madison's room. Sandra asked if there were any other improvements. Derek struggled to come up with anything. He mentioned fixing a leaky faucet once. He mentioned cleaning out the gutters one time. That was it. That was the sum total of his contributions in 5 years. Then Sandra asked about the promise I had supposedly made. She asked when I had made this promise. Derek said it was in conversations over the years, that I had said it many times. Sandra asked if anyone else had witnessed these conversations. Derek said Christine had heard some of them. Sandra asked if there was any written evidence of this promise. Any text messages, any emails, any documents. Derek said no. It was all verbal. So, Sandra said, you're asking this court to believe that your mother, who has meticulously documented every aspect of owning this property for over 20 years, who has receipts for every piece of lumber that went into building this house, simply forgot to put this major promise in writing? Derek didn't have a good answer for that. And then Sandra said the words that changed everything. Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence that was not included in our original filings. Evidence that is directly relevant to the defendant's claims about property rights and inheritance expectations. Judge Whitfield looked at Victor Brennan, who was frowning. He objected, saying that new evidence at this stage of the proceedings was inappropriate. But Sandra explained that this evidence had only recently been retrieved from long-term storage, and that it was crucial to establishing the true nature of the property rights in question. The judge allowed it. Sandra handed the judge a folder containing the documents Robert had signed 37 years earlier. Then she handed copies to Victor Brennan. Then she turned to Derek, who was still sitting in the witness stand, and she handed a copy to him. "Mr. Patterson," Sandra said to Derek, "do you recognize the name? Robert David Miller?" Derek's face went pale. "That's my father's name." "That's correct. And do you recognize this signature?" She pointed to the bottom of the first page. Derek looked at the document in his hands. I could see his eyes moving across the words, trying to understand what he was reading. "I don't know," he said. "I've never seen my father's signature before." "Well, we have had this signature verified by a handwriting expert," Sandra said. "It is indeed the signature of Robert David Miller, your biological father. And those documents, signed by your father on March 15th, 37 years ago, are quite interesting." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, what Mr. Patterson is holding is a set of 3 legal documents, all signed and notarized on the same date. The first is an acknowledgement of abandonment, in which Robert Miller admits to leaving Patricia Patterson and their unborn child without support or communication. The second is a voluntary termination of parental rights, in which Robert Miller gives up all legal claims to custody, visitation, or parental authority over the child, Derek Miller Patterson. And the third document, which is most relevant to today's proceedings, is a waiver of property claims." Sandra paused for effect. In this third document, Robert Miller explicitly waives any claim to any property currently owned or to be owned in the future by Patricia Patterson. Furthermore, and this is the crucial part, he extends this waiver to include any descendants of their union. In plain language, Robert Miller signed away not only his own rights to Patricia's property, but also any automatic inheritance rights that their children might expect. The courtroom was silent. Derek's face had gone from pale to almost gray. His hands were shaking as he held the documents. "I don't understand," he said. "What does this mean?" "It means," Sandra said, "that your father, by his own signature, acknowledged that you have no automatic claim to your mother's property. It means that any expectation you had of inheriting that house was just that, an expectation, not a legal right. It means that your mother has complete and total authority over who receives her property, and you have no standing to challenge that authority." Victor Brennan jumped up and started objecting. He said the documents were old and possibly invalid. He said Robert Miller should have had his own lawyer present when he signed. He said the documents were coercive and should not be admissible. But Judge Whitfield looked at the documents carefully. She examined the notary seal, the witness signatures, everything. Then she looked at Victor Brennan with an expression that shut him up mid-sentence. "These documents appear to be properly executed," she said. "They were signed voluntarily, witnessed, and notarized according to the standards of the time. I see no reason to exclude them from evidence." Sandra turned back to Derek. "Mr. Patterson, did you know that your father came back when you were 6 months old?" Derek looked stunned. "What? No. My mother told me he left before I was born and never came back." "Your mother was protecting you," Sandra said. "Your father did come back, but he came back because he had heard about a small inheritance your mother had received. He came back to try to get access to her money. When your mother discovered his true intentions, she had these documents drafted to protect herself and her future. She sent your father away and never saw him again. She never told you any of this because she didn't want you to know that your father was the kind of man who would try to steal from his own family." Derek turned to look at me. For the first time since I entered the courtroom, his eyes met mine. I don't know what I expected to see in his eyes. Shame, maybe. Regret. Understanding. Some flicker of the little boy I used to know. the one who hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. But what I saw was anger. Pure, undiluted anger. "You lied to me," he said. "My whole life. You lied to me about my father." I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell him that I had only been trying to protect him. I wanted to make him understand that every decision I made was out of love. But before I could say anything, Judge Whitfield spoke. "Mr. Patterson, we are not here to discuss family communications. We are here to determine property rights. And based on the evidence presented, the property rights are clear. The house at 4527 Maple Ridge Lane is owned solely by Patricia Patterson. There is no evidence of any legal transfer of ownership. There is no evidence of any binding promise of transfer. And based on these newly presented documents, there is no inherent expectation of inheritance that would give you standing to remain in the property against the owner's wishes." She looked at Derek with hard eyes. "What you have done, Mr. Patterson, is illegally occupy a property that does not belong to you. You have changed the locks to keep the rightful owner out. You have, in effect, stolen this woman's home. I am ordering you to vacate the property within 7 days. I am further ordering you to pay your mother's legal fees and any damages associated with her displacement, and I am issuing a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of the property once you have vacated." Derek's lawyer tried to argue. He tried to ask for more time, for an appeal, for anything. But Judge Whitfield was not interested. "This case is clear," she said. "The defendant has presented no credible evidence to support his claims. The plaintiff has presented overwhelming evidence of ownership, and these historical documents establish beyond doubt that the defendant had no legal expectation of inheriting this property. My ruling is final. We are adjourned." She banged her gavel, and just like that, it was over. I sat there for a moment, unable to move. My hands were still shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had won. After everything Derek had put me through, after all the stress and the heartbreak and the sleepless nights, I had won. Sandra put her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said. "The house is yours." I started to cry. Not sad tears, not exactly, just release. All the tension and fear and pain that had been building up inside me for months came pouring out in tears that I couldn't control. Martin was there suddenly, wrapping me in a hug. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You stood up for yourself. Mom and Dad would be so proud." I looked across the courtroom at Derek. He was still sitting at the table, staring at the documents in his hands. Christine had come up behind him and was talking rapidly, but he didn't seem to be listening. He looked lost, like someone who had been sure of something his whole life, only to discover it was never true. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for him. He was still my son. Despite everything he had done, I still loved him. I didn't like him very much in that moment, but I loved him. Then Christine looked over at me, and the hatred in her eyes was so intense that it took my breath away. She leaned down and whispered something in Derek's ear, and whatever she said made him get up and walk out of the courtroom without looking at me again. That was the last time I saw my son. The days after the court ruling were strange. On one hand, I felt victorious. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. On the other hand, I felt empty. I had lost my son, my granddaughter, any hope of the family I had always dreamed of having. True to the judge's order, Derek and Christine vacated the house within 7 days. I had Martin come with me when I went back for the first time, because I didn't want to face it alone. The house was a mess. They had left garbage everywhere. They had punched holes in walls. They had taken things that belonged to me and left behind things I would have to pay to remove. It looked like a hurricane had gone through it. But it was mine. Despite everything, it was still mine. I spent the next few weeks cleaning and repairing. Martin helped when he could. Some of my neighbors, people I had known for years, came by to offer assistance. They had heard about what happened, and they were outraged on my behalf. It was nice to know that not everyone in the world was like Derek. I repainted the walls. I replaced the locks again, this time with better ones. I fixed the holes and cleaned the carpets and threw away everything that Derek and Christine had left behind. Slowly, the house started to feel like home again, but the silence was deafening. For 5 years, the house had been full of noise. Madison's laughter, Derek's footsteps, Christine's voice on the phone. Now it was just me and the quiet. I thought about reaching out to Derek. I thought about trying to repair our relationship somehow. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered the look on his face in that courtroom. The anger, the blame, the complete lack of remorse for what he had done to me. Some wounds are too deep to heal with a phone call. About 3 months after the court case, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Derek. My hands shook as I opened it. Part of me was hoping for an apology. Part of me was hoping he had finally understood what he had done wrong. Part of me, the part that would always be his mother, was hoping for reconciliation. The letter was 2 pages long, and it was nothing like what I had hoped for. Derek blamed me for everything. He said I had ruined his life by not giving him the house. He said I had humiliated him in court by revealing secrets I had no right to reveal. He said I had turned his daughter against him, which made no sense because I hadn't seen Madison since before the court case. He said I was a selfish, controlling woman who had never really loved him. He ended the letter by saying that I was dead to him, that he never wanted to see me or hear from me again, that as far as he was concerned, he no longer had a mother. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it up, put it back in the envelope, and put it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying. By that point, I just felt numb. For a long time after that, I went through the motions of life, without really living it. I got up in the morning because that's what you do. I ate because I had to. I maintained the house because it was mine, and I had fought too hard for it to let it fall apart now. But there was no joy in any of it. What saved me eventually was Madison. About a year after the court case, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found my granddaughter standing on the porch. She was 8 years old now, taller than I remembered, with her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Next to her was a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as a social worker. "Mrs. Patterson," the social worker said, "there's been an incident involving your son and his wife. Madison needs a safe place to stay. She asked to come here." I didn't understand what was happening. I invited them inside, and the social worker explained. Derek and Christine had been arrested. The details were complicated, but essentially they had gotten involved in some kind of financial fraud scheme. Something to do with the money Christine's parents had given them for the legal fees. They had used it as seed money for a scam that had hurt a lot of people. Now they were both facing serious criminal charges. Madison couldn't stay with Christine's parents because they were implicated in the scheme as well. There was no one else. No aunts, no uncles, no close family friends. There was only me. "Grandma," Madison said, looking up at me with those big green eyes, "can I stay with you? Please. I don't have anywhere else to go." What could I say? This child was innocent. She had done nothing wrong. She was a victim of her parents' bad choices, just as much as I had been. I took her in. That was 2 years ago. Madison is 10 now. She lives with me in the house I built, the house I fought for, the house that almost cost me everything. She goes to school nearby and has friends in the neighborhood. She has her own room, the room that used to be Derek's, which I repainted and redecorated just for her. She calls me Grandma. She hugs me every night before bed. She tells me about her day, about her friends, about the things she's learning in school. She is, in many ways, the family I always wanted. Derek is in prison now. He got 4 years for his role in the fraud scheme. Christine got 3 years. They lost custody of Madison permanently because the court determined they were unfit parents. Sometimes Madison asks about her mom and dad. I try to answer honestly without being cruel. I tell her that they made some bad choices, that they're facing consequences for those choices, and that none of it is her fault. I tell her that I love her and that I will always take care of her. I haven't spoken to Derek since before his arrest. He hasn't tried to contact me either. I don't know if he knows that Madison is living with me. I don't know if he cares. I think about him sometimes, about where things went wrong, about what I could have done differently. Was I too lenient with him when he was young? Did I give him too much and expect too little? Did I fail to teach him the values that my parents taught me? I don't have answers to those questions. I probably never will. What I do know is this: I did the best I could with what I had. I loved my son with everything I had. I sacrificed for him, worked for him, built a future for him, and none of that was enough to make him into a good person. Some people will take everything you give them and still want more. Some people will blame you for their own failures. Some people will hurt you in ways you never thought possible, even when you've done nothing but love them. That's a hard lesson to learn, especially when the person teaching it to you is your own child. But here's what else I've learned. You can survive betrayal. You can survive losing people you thought would always be in your life. You can rebuild, even when it feels like there's nothing left to build with. I'm 65 now. I have my house, the house I built with my own hands. I have my granddaughter, who fills my days with light even when things are hard. I have my brother Martin, who has been my rock through everything. I have friends and neighbors who showed up for me when I needed them most. I don't have my son. That loss will always hurt. It will always leave a scar. But I am still standing. After everything, I'm still here. And that has to count for something. The secret I kept for 37 years almost destroyed my family, but in the end, it saved my home. It saved my future. It gave me the power to stand up for myself when my own son was trying to take everything from me. I don't regret keeping that secret. Robert didn't deserve to be remembered as anything other than a man who abandoned his family. And Derek didn't need to know that his father had come back only to try to steal from us. That knowledge wouldn't have helped him. It wouldn't have made him a better person. But when the time came, when I needed protection, that secret was there. Those documents were there. The foresight I had as a 24-year-old single mother, the decision to protect myself legally, even when I had no money and no power, that saved me. So if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: protect yourself. Even when it seems unnecessary. Even when you think the people around you would never hurt you. You never know what the future holds. You never know who might turn against you. And when that day comes, you want to be ready. I hope my son finds peace someday. I hope he uses his time in prison to reflect on who he became and why. I hope that when he gets out, he chooses a different path. But even if he doesn't, even if he never changes, I know that I did everything I could. I gave him every opportunity. I loved him unconditionally. And when he tried to take my home, I fought back. I went to court. I revealed my secret, and I won. That's my story. That's how I lost my son, but kept my home. That's how a secret I kept for 37 years changed everything. I look at Madison sometimes, watching her do homework at the kitchen table or playing in the backyard, and I think about the future. I think about who she might become. I think about whether she'll make better choices than her parents did. And I make her the same promises I made to Derek when he was born. I promise to give her everything I can. I promise to teach her what's right. I promise to love her no matter what. But I also keep documents. I also protect myself. Because I learned the hard way that love isn't always enough. Madison knows about what happened with her father and me. Not all the details, but the basic story. She knows that her father tried to take my house and that I had to go to court to get it back. She knows that her father is in prison for doing bad things, and she knows that no matter what her father did, I still loved him, that I still love him, even now, because that's what mothers do. She told me once, just a few months ago, that she wants to be like me when she grows up. Strong, she said. You're the strongest person I know, Grandma. I don't know if I'm strong. I just did what I had to do to survive. But if Madison sees that as strength, then maybe I did something right. Maybe there's hope for the next generation after all. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this whole situation? Was Patricia right to keep those secrets for so long? Should she have handled things differently with Derek when he was growing up? And what do you think about Derek himself? About the choices he made and where he ended up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I love hearing your perspectives on these stories. They always make me think about things in ways I hadn't considered before. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you think or feel something, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next story. I have some incredible ones coming up that I can't wait to share with you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.